They laughed when a teenage boy walked into court wearing a wrinkled suit. The judge mocked him, the lawyers smirked, but by the end of the trial, he exposed the real criminal and left the entire courtroom speechless. The courtroom was silent until the gavel slammed down. "Order!" barked Judge Harold Simmons, his voice booming off the high wooden walls like a warning shot. His eyes scanned the packed gallery and then froze. Standing at the defendant's table was not a seasoned lawyer in a crisp suit, but a boy, barely 17. His jacket was too big for his frame, his tie knotted awkwardly, and his shoes didn't even match. In his hands he clutched a stack of legal papers so tightly his knuckles turned white. The judge leaned forward, squinting, then chuckled. "Son, I think you're in the wrong room," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "This isn't a school debate club. This is a real court." A ripple of laughter ran through the room, from the gallery to the prosecution's table. But the boy didn't flinch. He calmly adjusted his glasses and looked the judge straight in the eye. "Your Honor," he said in a steady voice, "I'm exactly where I need to be." The judge arched an eyebrow. "Oh? And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "Today," the boy replied, "I am the legal representative for the defendant, my father." The air shifted instantly. Whispered murmurs spread across the gallery like wildfire. The judge blinked in disbelief, then shook his head. "Well," he said, tapping his gavel against the bench with an almost amused rhythm, "we'll see how long this little performance lasts." The prosecutor, Ms. Laura Clark, sat poised at her table, her lips pursed into a confident smile. She was a veteran, 10 years of high-profile convictions under her belt, and now she was facing a kid? Judge Simmons cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started. Prosecution, you may proceed." Ms. Clark stood, her heels clicking against the floor, and began presenting her case. "Your Honor, the evidence against the defendant is clear. Mr. Carter," she gestured toward the boy's father, "illegally transferred funds from investors into personal accounts. We have signed documents, financial records, and eyewitness testimony confirming his guilt." The prosecutor's words dripped with certainty, but the boy, Ryan Carter, simply took notes in a small, worn notebook. When the prosecution finished, the judge turned to him. "Your turn, Mr. Carter," the judge said, still sounding skeptical. "Do try to keep this concise." Ryan stood slowly, gathering a few papers in his hands. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Your Honor, the prosecution's evidence is impressive, but every piece of it points to someone else entirely." A soft stir ran through the crowd. Ms. Clark's smirk faded just a little. Ryan walked to the evidence table, picked up one of the supposed fraud documents, and held it up. "This handwriting," he said, "doesn't belong to my father. And these account numbers, they're linked to a shell company created 3 years before my father even started his business." Judge Simmons frowned, glancing at the document. Ms. Clark rose from her seat. "Objection! Speculation!" Ryan countered instantly. "Not speculation, Your Honor. I had this handwriting analyzed last week by a certified expert. The results are in the report I submitted this morning." The judge leaned forward. "Is that true, Ms. Clark?" Ms. Clark hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor. But it doesn't disprove the rest of the evidence." Ryan nodded, unfazed. "It will, if you give me the chance." The rest of the morning turned into a battle of wits. Ryan cross-examined the prosecution's star witness, catching him in contradiction after contradiction. "You claim you saw my father sign these documents on March 12th? Ryan asked. "Yes," the witness said confidently. Ryan placed a large photograph on the table for everyone to see. "This is my father at a charity fundraiser in Chicago, hundreds of miles away, on that exact date." The witness shifted uncomfortably. I might be mistaken." Ryan's voice sharpened. "Mistaken or lying under oath?" Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge's gavel cracked down. "Order!" he demanded. but his expression was no longer one of amusement. It was one of interest. Piece by piece, Ryan tore apart the prosecution's narrative. He revealed that the fraudulent transfers came from an IP address registered to the very witness accusing his father. He demonstrated that multiple documents had forged signatures, and he produced emails linking the witness to the real culprit, a former employee who had conveniently vanished overseas. When Ryan presented his final piece of evidence, a sworn statement from that very culprit confessing to the fraud, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Simmons slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Silence. I will have silence in my court." The judge looked at Ryan for a long moment, then sighed. "Mr. Carter, when you walked in here today, I mocked you. I doubted you, and I was wrong. You've demonstrated skill, preparation, and a respect for the law that would put many practicing attorneys to shame." He turned to the clerk. "The charges against Mr. Carter are dismissed. The defendant is free to go." Ryan's father stood, eyes wet with tears, and hugged his son. The gallery burst into applause. As Ryan gathered his papers, Judge Simmons called out, "When you're old enough, this court could use attorneys like you." Ryan smiled faintly. "Thank you, Your Honor, but right now I just want to go home." And with that, the boy who had been mocked as a child walked out as a hero, proving that sometimes the sharpest mind in the room belongs to the one you least expect. The case was serious, too serious for most lawyers, let alone a teenager. Fraud. A single word that carried the weight of years in prison, financial ruin, and the permanent stain of being labeled a criminal. For Ryan Carter's father, it meant losing not just his freedom, but his dignity, his business, and the trust of everyone who had ever believed in him. At the prosecution's table sat Ms. Laura Clark, one of the most feared attorneys in the state. Her reputation for winning was legendary, and her sharp eyes scanned the thick folder in front of her like a hawk searching for its prey. Every page she flipped felt like another nail in the coffin she was building for Ryan's father. Judge Harold. Simmons leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying the young figure at the defense table. His expression made it clear. He expected this boy to crumble before the trial even began. "All right, mister," he prompted, his voice dripping with doubt. "Ryan Carter," came the steady reply. The judge raised his brows, clearly surprised by the firmness in the boy's tone. "All right, Mr. Carter, let's begin. Try not to embarrass yourself." His words drew a faint smirk from Ms. Clark, who already smelled victory. The prosecution began, methodically laying out the case like an executioner sharpening a blade. Ms. Clark presented bank statements, witness testimonies, and crisp photographs. Her voice was cool, confident, and razor-sharp. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's company siphoned money from investors. The paper trail is undeniable." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. When it was finally Ryan's turn, he stood slowly, adjusting his oversized suit jacket. He looked directly at Judge Simmons. "Your Honor," he began, "the paper trail is undeniable, but it leads somewhere else entirely." The judge tilted his head, curiosity flickering across his face. "Go on." Ryan walked to the evidence table, his steps deliberate, each one echoing on the hardwood floor. He picked up one of the so-called incriminating documents and held it high for everyone to see. "This isn't my father's handwriting. And the account numbers? They belong to a shell company formed 3 years before my father even started his business." The murmurs grew louder this time, spreading like wildfire. The judge's smirk faded. Ms. Clark's pen froze above her notes. It wasn't just luck guiding Ryan's words. For years, he had been quietly studying law in secret. He had devoured his father's old textbooks, memorized courtroom procedures, and watched hours of real trials online. His father had taught him never to be afraid of authority, only to be afraid of injustice. That lesson had carved itself deep into Ryan's mind, and today it was the weapon he brought to court. When the prosecution's key witness, a former employee of his father's company, was called to the stand, Ryan seized his moment. "You testified," Ryan began, "that you saw my father signing the fraudulent documents, correct?" "Yes," the witness said confidently. Ryan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "And you're sure about the date?" "Absolutely." Ryan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this photograph into evidence. It shows my father at a charity event in another state, on the exact date the witness claims he saw him sign these papers." The bailiff brought the photo to the judge, who examined it carefully. A wave of gasps swept across the room as the gallery saw the truth for themselves. There was Ryan's father shaking hands with the mayor at a crowded fundraiser, nowhere near the alleged crime scene. The witness's confidence wavered. I must be mistaken." Ryan's voice sharpened, his tone now a scalpel cutting through every lie. "Mistaken or lying under oath?" The room went dead silent, as if the air had been sucked out. The judge's gavel slammed against the block, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Order! Order in the court!" His voice carried no amusement now, only the seriousness of a man beginning to realize he might have been wrong about the boy standing before him. Ms. Clark tried to regain her footing. "Your Honor, this does not disprove the rest of the evidence," Ryan cut in, his confidence unshaken. "It will, if you allow me to continue." Judge Simmons leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Not in judgment this time, but in intrigue. For the first time since the trial began, he wasn't looking at Ryan as a foolish teenager out of his depth. He was looking at him as a challenger, someone capable of turning this case on its head. The tension was thick now, wrapping itself around every person in that room. The jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The gallery leaned forward in their seats. The prosecution's smirk was gone, and Ryan Carter, the boy everyone had underestimated, was just getting started. It wasn't just luck that brought Ryan to this moment. For years he had been preparing in silence, late nights spent under a dim desk lamp, pages of dense legal text spread out before him, weekends watching trial footage, studying the tone, the timing, the rhythm of a real courtroom. He had learned how objections were raised, how evidence was presented, how a question could trap a liar without a single raised voice. His father had taught him early. Authority could intimidate you, but only injustice could destroy you. And today, injustice was standing right in front of him. Ryan faced the witness again, his posture calm, but his eyes locked like a predator. "You testified," he repeated slowly, "that you saw my father sign these fraudulent documents with your own eyes?" "Yes," the witness answered, his voice still confident but with a faint tremor underneath. Ryan tilted his head as if puzzled. "And you're absolutely sure about the date of this supposed signing?" "Absolutely," the witness replied, straightening his shoulders. Ryan didn't look at the witness this time. He looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this into evidence." He handed a glossy photograph to the bailiff. The judge adjusted his glasses and studied the image. Ryan's voice carried through the silent room. "This photograph shows my father at a charity fundraiser in Chicago, hundreds of miles away, on the exact date the witness claims. He was signing these papers." The reaction was instant. Gasps swept through the gallery like a wave. Jurors shifted in their seats. Ms. Clark's pen, which had been tapping steadily on the table, went still. The witness's eyes darted to the photo, then back to Ryan. I must be mistaken," he said weakly. Ryan's expression hardened. "Mistaken or lying under oath?" The words hit like a hammer blow. The witness flinched. The crowd leaned in. The judge's gavel slammed against the block, the sharp crack cutting through the tension. "Order!" Judge Simmons barked, but his voice no longer carried the mocking edge it had when the trial began. This was different, serious, heavy, and focused. Ryan didn't break eye contact with the witness. Because if you are lying under oath, you understand that's perjury, correct? A criminal offense that carries prison time. The man's hands twitched on the stand. His confident mask was slipping. I just... Maybe the date... No, Ryan said, his voice firm. You weren't mistaken about the date when you testified earlier. You were certain. But now, faced with evidence you can't deny, your story changes. The witness opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Ryan turned to the judge. Your Honor, I believe this witness's credibility is now in question. And if his testimony is unreliable, then a large part of the prosecution's case collapses. Judge Simmons studied Ryan for a long moment. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the air vents could be heard. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. Mr. Carter, he said slowly, you've made your point. Proceed. And just like that, the trial had shifted. The boy the judge had once mocked was no longer a curiosity. He was a threat to the prosecution's entire case. Piece by piece, Ryan dismantled the prosecution's case, not with bluster or theatrics, but with cold, precise facts. Every time Ms. Clark tried to regain control, Ryan would present another nail in the coffin of her argument. First, he brought up the bank's digital logs. Your Honor, Ryan said, holding up a printed report, these records show that the financial transfers in question came from a single IP address, and that IP address is registered to the home of the prosecution's star witness. The witness shifted uncomfortably, mumbling something under his breath. Ryan didn't give him an inch. So either my father committed fraud by breaking into your home and using your internet, which there's no evidence for, or... He let the pause hang in the air, letting the jury connect the dots themselves. Next, Ryan slid another set of documents across the table. Let's talk about the handwriting on these fraudulent contracts. The prosecution claims this is my father's signature, but here, he pulled out an employee file, is the signature of Mr. Daniel Hayes, another employee of my father's company. As you can see, the handwriting is identical. Ms. Clark objected instantly. Your Honor, the defense is speculating. Overruled, Judge Simmons said, leaning forward with a rare spark of curiosity in his eyes. I want to see where this goes, Ryan continued. Now, Mr. Hayes conveniently left the country just days after the fraud was discovered. No one has heard from him since. My father, on the other hand, didn't run. He stayed, he cooperated, and he's here today, ready to fight for the truth. For the first time since the trial began, the judge wasn't just watching, he was invested. Mr. Carter, he said slowly, how exactly do you know all this? Ryan took a deep breath. His voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath. Because I've been preparing for this my entire life. I study the law every day. I've read hundreds of cases, memorized procedures, and learned how to find the truth buried in lies. My father taught me many things, Your Honor. But most of all, he taught me that no matter who stands against you, you never stop fighting when you know you're right. And I know one thing for certain. My father is innocent. The words landed like a thunderclap in the silent room. Even Ms. Clark, sharp, confident Ms. Clark, looked unsettled. Her fingers tapped nervously on the desk, but Ryan wasn't finished. Last night, I tracked down a former colleague of Mr. Hayes. It took hours of phone calls and persuasion, and in the early hours of the morning, I got this. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded document. The bailiff took it to the judge. Judge Simmons unfolded the paper and began reading. His eyes widened slightly. Then he looked up. Is this a signed confession? Yes, Your Honor, Ryan replied. From the real culprit. Mr. Hayes admits in his own words that he orchestrated the fraud, forged my father's signature, and funneled the stolen money into his own accounts before fleeing the country. The room erupted. Jurors glanced at one another in disbelief. People in the gallery whispered and gasped. Someone actually stood up before being told to sit back down. The judge slammed his gavel so hard, the sound echoed off the walls. "Silence! I will have silence in my court!" His voice was sharper now, not angry, but struggling to maintain control of a room that had just witnessed the unraveling of an entire case. Ryan stood silently, letting the weight of the evidence settle over everyone present. Ms. Clark rose to speak, but her voice faltered. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to review this new evidence." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Clark, you had every opportunity to investigate this matter thoroughly. This confession changes everything. Unless you have evidence to refute it, I see no reason to continue this trial." Ms. Clark glanced down at her papers, but there was nothing left. No argument, no defense for her case. Slowly, she sat back down. Judge Simmons leaned back in his chair, looking at Ryan for a long moment. The boy he had mocked earlier now stood in front of him as the clear victor. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, "your father is free to go. Case dismissed." The gavel came down one last time. The sound was final, decisive. Ryan turned to his father, who was already on his feet, tears welling in his eyes. They embraced tightly. The gallery applauded quietly, despite courtroom protocol, and as they walked out together, Ryan glanced back one last time at the empty witness stand. He knew this wasn't the end, because somewhere Mr. Hayes was still out there. But for today, justice had been served. After a long, heavy silence, Judge Simmons slowly removed his glasses. He didn't look down at his notes, nor at the prosecution. He looked directly at Ryan. "Young man," the judge began, his voice softer now, "I owe you an apology." The entire courtroom went still. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed to fade. "When you walked in here this morning, I mocked you. I doubted your ability, your intelligence, even your right to stand in this courtroom. I thought you were playing dress-up. But you've proven me wrong. Completely wrong." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You've shown yourself to be one of the most prepared, fearless, and sharp-witted advocates I've seen in all my years on the bench. And you did it under pressure most seasoned lawyers would struggle with." Ryan didn't smile, didn't gloat, he simply nodded respectfully. Judge Simmons turned toward the clerk. "The charges against Mr. Carter are dismissed. He is free to go immediately." The gavel came down one final time, echoing like a victory drum. Ryan's father stood frozen for a moment, as if making sure he had heard correctly. Then he moved forward, wrapping his arms around his son in a tight embrace. There were tears in his eyes, tears of relief, pride, and something deeper, gratitude for a son who refused to let him fall. The gallery erupted into applause, something rarely seen in a courtroom. Even a few members of the jury stood, clapping with genuine admiration. Ms. Clark, the prosecutor, sat quietly, her expression unreadable. Whether it was disappointment, respect, or a mix of both, no one could tell. Ryan began gathering his papers, carefully sliding them into his worn leather folder. He moved with the same calm he had shown throughout the trial, as if the adrenaline had already faded and all that was left was quiet satisfaction. Just as he was about to walk out, Judge Simmons called after him. "Mr. Carter?" Ryan turned. "When you're old enough, my court could use attorneys like you. I hope you'll consider it." For the first time that day, Ryan allowed himself a genuine smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. "But for now, I just want to go home." The judge gave a small nod, and Ryan stepped away from the defense table. He and his father walked toward the double doors at the back of the room, the crowd parting, to let them pass. Every step felt like a victory march, though Ryan carried himself with the quiet humility of someone who had fought for truth, not for glory. As they reached the exit, Ryan glanced back one last time. The judge was already speaking. To the clerk, and the once hostile courtroom now seemed almost welcoming. In the witness stand sat an empty chair, a reminder of the false testimony that had almost destroyed his father's life. That chapter was closed now. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun bathed the steps in golden light. The air felt fresher, the world wider. His father gripped his shoulder and said, "I don't know how you did it, son, but I will never forget it." Ryan shrugged modestly. "I just did what you taught me. Never back down when you're right." They walked together toward the street, blending into the bustle of the city. Passers-by had no idea they were looking at a young man who had just outsmarted a team of seasoned prosecutors. To them, he was just another teenager in an ill-fitting suit. But inside that courthouse, a legend had been born. The boy who had walked in as a laughingstock had walked out a hero. And though Ryan didn't seek recognition, the people who had witnessed his performance would talk about it for years, because sometimes the sharpest mind in the room doesn't belong to the oldest face. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet, determined soul who refuses to be underestimated, and who fights for justice with nothing more than the truth and the courage to speak it.